Okay, there we go. Welcome everyone to the June 17th Sewer Advisory Committee meeting. We're going to get started with the approval of the SAC minutes from February 19th. Is anyone? Sorry?
I moved.
Okay. A second on that?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that
I'm sorry, I
passes.
didn't catch who seconded.
Second?
Yeah, I didn't catch. Who was that?
That
Jay
was
it?
Jay.
Jay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, let's get going with the 2020 capital projects.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Marty, you're up.
I'm back in. God, I was listening to the... All right, so the 2020 capital projects, the CAS aeration upgrades, we have placed an order for the new aero strips in April, and the ship date is currently July 1st, 2020. So no updates on that. Probably a little behind on everything because everybody was on the lockdown split shift, but we're still moving along right now. The CIP blower replacement, we did have the welder prefab a lot of the stainless piping in his shop, and the last 2 days he's been on site here getting the lines welded in proper locations. So right now we're ready to get the blower up and in place, and we have a rental forklift scheduled for next week to get that thing in place and hooked up, and then we'd have to contact the Atlas Copco for the startup, which is in the bid. Yeah, that's the updates on the capital projects.
Wow, that was very quick. All right, how about the 2020 maintenance projects?
So maintenance projects, we had let's go with the effluent. The effluent sluice gates arrived, and we will begin installation on those after digester cleaning and CAS blower. We just completed a digester cleaning in-house. Kind of everything fell through a little bit after the decant station, and then the people that Provac didn't want to, they only wanted to deal with us if we were utilizing the decant station. And so once they realized we couldn't use the decant station, they had let their permit expire for transporting.
No.
Yeah, so they can't transport solids across county lines, and so they couldn't find anybody who could take it. And so we just started doing it in-house, and really that was the first thing we did when we all came back to work, was got the digester dewatered and solids sent out, and got it done in-house.
Okay.
So it was work, but it does upset the plan a little bit, for a while. Not completely upset violation, but it doesn't run optimal when you're trying to do all that in-house with these, couple 100,000 gallon digesters back into the process. So that, like I said, the effluent sluice gates, those will begin after the CAS blower. We're focusing on the CAS blower. It costs a lot of money. We kind of were waiting for the welder to be able to come back on site, get those pipes fitted up, and then we're going to throw that up and go from there. The deck coatings was next. So that was just a capital outlay. I did speak to a Procora representative that was involved in the original coating, and he's scheduled to visit Tuesday, the 23rd, to assess the aging and send me in the right direction in regards to maintenance needed. It does look pretty good, though. The coatings have kind of held up amazing, and the only wear I could see is like expansion joints and some of the cracks. So hopefully it's minimal. The exterior coatings, we have begun contacting and scheduling site visits for contractors to bid project, and have received one bid so far on that, and that will take care of a lot of the a lot of the steel I-beams that are throughout the plant. We have a bridge crane over the MBR, so a lot of that stuff needs to be redone. It's cracking, and it's getting pretty bad. The secondary wet well scum pit pumps and lines, again, those are all parts are in, and those are in line. We're kind of a little backed up. But a good thing about it is we have all the parts, so we'll never be bored when it comes to stuff, and we're not going to run out of stuff to do. We're just playing a lot of catch up right now while still trying to be safe and be smart about all the installations. So
What
we
is
do have.
this, Randy? What is a scum pit? It sounds bad. But
Yeah,
what is it?
yeah, it is bad.
It's like we have the skimmer on top of the clarifiers. So if you have any grease that makes it by, or any floatables or any popped solids during weird conditions, you don't really want to send it back to the plant. So it skims it. And so those things were removed years ago. And so previously they would just get sent right back. Any scum or grease or anything would just get sent right back to the head of the plant, and it would just keep recirculating and recirculating, and it build up. If you had any kind of weird upset conditions and you have a lot of stuff pop up in the secondary, it just doesn't go away because there's nowhere to send it. It just goes back through. So these pumps would actually pump it out and send it to a waste tank, and we could actually get rid of it that way. And they were original design. They had just got removed years ago.
And then Marty, when it goes to these waste tanks, and then we take it somewhere.
Well, then it gets sent to like our digester. We thicken it.
Oh, okay. So it goes kind of back in again.
It's pretty much solids processing, and we send it out. It gets processed through our digesters and then dewatered and sent out to fertilize people's corn.
Okay.
And then we have the fence repairs and extension. The fence project has been completed around the back of the plant. The city will need to stop in next time. They need the creek sample taken to get a key for us. We have a back gate on there now.
Okay.
And so the final invoice has been sent up for processing on that. And then we have the administrative building flooring. I'm not sure if you can see the new.
Yeah.
Oh, that looks nice. Is it carpet?
It's carpet tile.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the carpet that was in here before was not in too bad a shape around the edges where nobody walked at. So it actually wasn't my idea. Someone else had brought it up to try carpet tile because you can just replace the parts of wear.
Right.
Sure.
And they use it a lot for commercial and.
Yep.
And so that carpet administrative carpet installation has been completed, and we're still awaiting the final invoice on that. I think I touched on everything as far as that goes. And then,
Okay. Well, that was very efficient. Thank you. How about the nutrients in the ERU capacity?
Okay, so excuse me, I have postnasal drip. These weather changes just destroy me.
That's the problem with vacationing in Hawaii.
Yeah.
It's the warm weather that's getting to me. So I've got a presentation I want to give you. It's going to be a little lengthy, but it's very important that we touch on some key points and you have a good understanding of what's going on. Marty's going to provide you some information at the end regarding what's going on with an advisory committee that advises on the permitting process, and just give you some good information as to what's being looked at. I want to forewarn you, a lot of this information is speculation and assumption, because as we go through, you will understand that the nutrients general permit is not developed yet. So I need to be able to share my screen. So if our host could enable that.
Yep, give me just a minute here.
And I'll walk you through.
Randy,
Yes.
who prepared this report?
It was I.
Oh, okie doke.
Go ahead, Randy.
You can just pick it apart.
Noted.
Okay, has everybody seen a big screen? It says SKWRF facility nutrients general permit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let me close out everybody's picture so I can see my notes. So a couple of things we're going to talk about here as I go through this slide presentation. We're going to talk about the SKWRF itself, we're going to talk about its performance limitations, our approach to sustain the capacity with this potential permitting requirement. We're going to talk about the nutrient cap itself, and then we're going to get into some capacity discussions and projections for when our facility at various permitted levels within the plant for the loading basically is going to be at capacity based on growth projections. Okay. So one of the things about the plant performance limitations is, as you know, back when this plant was designed, it did not address nutrient removal. So we do have some limitations that we would have to overcome potentially because of the design and the processes within the plant. As you know, we also have a very limited footprint, and major expansion may be questionable in the future. We don't know, but it is something that has to be considered. During the 2004-2006 upgrade, of course, we did have the MBR installed. It is a system and a process that does provide for nutrient removal, but we also have a finite capacity. In general, as you know, even with the upgrades and all the changes in the plant, there still is a finite capacity that we have to consider for the plant. So currently, our permit under condition S4A, permit conditions, basically says that any flow that we have coming into the plant can't exceed 4.2 mgd over a max month, and we can only take as far as carbonaceous BOD. We can only have 6,340 pounds a day when we run all the testing. That's what it has to come out to or below. This is our max permit conditions. And our influent loading, or suspended solids, which is TSS, is 6,910 pounds per day. Same thing. And as we go through, when we look at those permit conditions, we get into SB, there's a couple things that are kind of important for everyone to know. That we have, I had a pointer, hold on here. There we go. We have consideration in our permit for, and to have plans for maintaining adequate capacity triggered by conditions and plan submittal. And basically what it says is any one of the design criteria in S4A for 3 consecutive months, or when we project that the flow or loading would reach the design capacity within 5 years, we have to come back and come up with a plan to either expand the plant, or we have to basically stop taking on connections. So we're going to assume that a nutrient cap would be a fixed value, and we'll highlight that a little bit later because last Friday I was informed by Ecology, and as part of this presentation I have some information, but I wasn't going to change the presentation. Ecology had forwarded us some draft permits that they had issued to treatment plants late last week. So as we go through this, you're going to see a lot of this information is very dynamic. It changes potentially from week to week, month to month, and so there's really nothing to hang your hat on. But with that said, we have to assume that if they do have a nutrient cap placed on SKWRF, it would be a fixed cap, and it wouldn't be subject to any waste load criteria conditions. It just doesn't make sense from either a scientific perspective or from a regulatory perspective to have that kind of waste load criteria attached to any kind of nutrient cap. So how does this translate? Let's take a look at where we're at and where we are currently, and then give you folks kind of an understanding of where the plant's at. I may highlight some things and say, you know, you might want to remember this because a lot of things that I'm going to go over are going to become key points within this presentation. So if we take a look at SKWRF flow from 2014 through March of 2020, and those dates are kind of important because beginning in 2014 with our last issuance of the NPDES permit, SKWRF had to begin monitoring nutrients within the plant. So we had to do total phosphorus, ortho-P, nitrite, nitrate, total nitrogen, Keldol nitrogen, so a bunch of nutrients and what's considered toxics. Excuse me, we had to begin the monitoring process. When we look at these graphs, and I kept them consistent for ease, this red line represents our current max permit capacity. This line here would represent the trigger point, and of course, this represents our analytical data that is provided to ecology based on our internal monitoring of our system on a daily basis, or, excuse me, on our permitted requirement monitoring basis. Now, SKWRF is kind of lucky. We have what's considered an irregular monitoring program. And there's basically two types that I'm aware of. That's a regular and irregular. We have an irregular. And how that plays out when you define irregular, it just means that we have to perform so many samples per week. Currently, the plant has 3 sample requirements per week, and it's up to the plant to determine when they want to take those samples. We're not required for any consistency. We could come in and do those samples Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and that would take care of a 2-week period. We can do them any days of the week we want, as long as we do 3 days, and they do not have to be consecutive. So we have a little flexibility there. It's kind of a key point and a big plus on our part to be able to have that flexibility. One of the things I did is I summarized some of this data for you. What you'll see is at our current permit capacity, when we look at our trigger point of 3.57 MGD, the plant is currently at 51.9% of that. That's based on the flow from 2014 to 2020 March, and we're 44.2% of the total capacity of 4.2 MGD. Okay. If we look at 2019 through March of 2020, you see some interesting things, and this is normal for us. We see that as we come out of the winter season, those flows drop off, and as we go in, those flows peak. And we all know that it rains in the winter here, and sometimes snows and melts, and we expect to see those hydraulic increases along with inflow and infiltration, which happens from both the city system and the district system. Looking at that date range from 2019 through March of 2020, you see that we're 50%, a little over 50% of that trigger point, 42.7% of the permit limit. So if we take and summarize this and only look at data for 2019, basically we're sitting at 42.7% of capacity for ultimate permit capacity, 50.2 of the trigger capacity. As reported by the city and the district, we have 11,284 ERUs. And when we run the numbers, that gives us approximately 99 gallons per ERU per day, based over the whole year's average. And it demonstrates that we would have a remaining capacity of over 30,000 ERUs for the max permit capacity, and 24,000 for trigger point. Now we have to look at the second parameter that we're currently permitted under, and that's the carbonaceous BOD loading. And here again, we're going to use the same date ranges. So I will skip kind of explaining everything, and then we'll just talk about where we're at. So currently we're at 57% of the trigger and 48.4% of the total permit allowance. If we look at the 2019 through March of 20, 56.9 and 48.4. So you see a lot of consistency in how this works. Summary of that information, basically, a lot of this information is the same. It directly relates to that parameter in which we're discussing, but basically it comes down and says that based on the capacity, we have 13,000, a little over 13,000 ERUs for the max capacity of our facility, and a little over 9,400 for the trigger point. Now you notice these change depending on the parameter we're looking at. Now we're going to look at the suspended solids loading, which is the third parameter under that S4. And you see that we're at 67.5% of that trigger point, and we're at 57.3% of the permit. And we're going to talk about some of those issues later on. TSS loading, same thing. If we look through 2019 through 2020, you still see whether we're up here, about 57, 56%. And in a summary, drops those ERUs down to a remaining capacity of 9,500 for max and 6,200 for trigger, okay? We take all that information, we put it together based on the 2019 data. What you will notice is the numbers that I provided for you as far as your capacity were right here. This is our ERUs right here. And this is the calculated capacity based on this permit limit for max at the plant, okay? So now we want to talk a little bit about nutrient reduction and kind of give you the scenario of what's transpired over the few years and have you kind of understand what's going on, how we're looking at it, and why this becomes a very difficult thing to explain. As we go through, you're going to understand why I just made that statement. So what we do know, okay? So we know back in 2018, the Northwest Environmental Advocates petitioned Ecology for rulemaking. And what they said is they wanted Ecology to apply ACART to all plants that basically discharged into state-owned waters. ACART stands for All Known, Available, and Reasonable Technology. And basically what that means is they want any and all technology that is reasonable to have in a wastewater treatment facility to have a requirement from Ecology that the plants obtain that. And they wanted effluent limits of total nitrogen of 3 milligrams per liter and total phosphorus of 0.1 milligrams per liter or lower. They also wanted to require in that petition that all treatment facilities use tertiary treatment technology to reduce toxics. Remember, we were talking a little bit about when you break up your speciation of your nutrients and other things that you'll see that Ecology is not looking at, but they're considered toxins. So in January 11th, 2019, Ecology came back to Northwest Environmental Advocates and said that they're going to deny their petition. Ecology stated to them at the time they were committed to the cap nutrients and to continue modeling in Puget Sound, but they weren't really ready to go to that extreme. Ecology stated that they would set nutrient loading limits at current levels from all permitted discharges in Puget Sound. Now, this is a very important thing. Set nutrient load limits at current levels. Keep that in mind. And its key tributaries, and prevent the increases in loading that will continue to contribute to Puget Sound's repair status. They would also require permittees to initiate planning efforts to evaluate different effluent reduction, nutrient reduction targets, which is kind of an interesting statement from our perspective, because we understand that they want to evaluate different effluent nutrient reduction targets, but as discussions have ensued, and Marty will talk a little bit about this, they really don't know what they're looking for, and that's where a huge problem becomes. Also, they said that for treatment plants that are already used nutrient removal processes, nitrification, denitrification, the FICA process, when they reissued permits, they would reflect the treatment efficiency of the existing plants by implementing numeric effluent limits. So that's kind of important too. If you remember earlier, I talked about the 3 milligrams for total nitrogen and less than 0.1 or 0.1 for total phosphorus. So they kind of said that they would do that and they would use the information as design parameters of facility-specific engineering reports. So they also said that they want to cap loads at current, and that's another current kind of important thing for you to keep in mind. So basically what they said was they plan on putting caps in and having a permit, but they really wanted to take individual plants and say, wherever you're at currently, that's where we want to start with your cap. So they want to initiate planning to evaluate that nutrient reduction. And they also want to, and this is very important, reissue permits to reflect treatment plant efficiency. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked to you and said that our plant was never designed for nutrient removal. So our efficiency for nutrient removal in that plant overall is less than 10%. Okay, so these are all important things. So that was January 11th, 2019. In March of 2019, our governor came back and kind of reiterated some public comments in regards to the Northwest Environmental Advocates Petition appeal denial, and said some pretty interesting things. You know, this was a kind of a timeline gap between when this happened and when they came back. So between ecology and our state administration, they really thought this through. So basically the governor said, well, we'll do near term, we'll look at load caps within the next 5 years. And so he said that they expect to have capped the nutrient levels discharged from municipal treatment facilities, and concurrently moving some facilities to advanced treatment programs that will reduce overall nutrient level in Puget Sound. Just reiterated what ecology had said when they denied the appeal. In regards to ACARTs, and this is interesting too, WQBELs, which stands for Water Quality Based Effluent Limits, instantly went on to say, you know, we all share the same goals. We want these removed, and we want to do everything that is available and reasonable. And additional treatment may be required to meet water quality standards. What's interesting is there is no specific water quality standards that have been developed at this time. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So NWEA came back and decided to sue Department of Ecology. On January 24th of this year, NWEA basically cited Ecology's lack of compliance with the ACART. And Ecology cites potential economic hardship and informed the Northwest Environmental Advocates that if they have issues with individual permits, that they can appeal them through the normal appeal process when draft permits are issued. And the judge in this case ruled in favor of Ecology and felt that that was fair. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the nutrient general permit and the timeline. Now keep in mind, we're in January of this year. So this is when all this is happening. So on January 30th of 2020, Ecology announced that they were going to move forward with developing this draft permit. And they said that they would look at nearly 70 treatment plants discharging to marine waters of Puget Sound. Now this is kind of interesting because not all the plants, the 70 that have been identified, have been monitoring nutrients over time. We have a lot of zombie permits out there, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Also said this nutrients general permit will focus only on controlling nutrients and work in conjunction with wastewater treatment plants' existing individual permits. So what they said basically is they're going to control nutrients, but they're not looking to put any kind of specific numerical cap basically on those plants, and remember as before, that don't specifically currently remove nutrients as part of the plant process. One of the other things that Ecology did with this is they created a permit advisory committee. You know, it has ecology, tribes, EPA, a lot of people attend this. And so this advisory committee is designed to provide input from treatment plants, regulatory agencies, and those that have environmental concerns as to how this can be developed, work with the different plants, work with Ecology in developing a plan or a general permit that will meet the needs of these folks while kind of considering, in a sense, based on previous statements, the economic hardships and impacts this may provide to POTWs, which we are one. Just as an FYI, Marty participates. I do when I have time, but Marty participates fully with this permit advisory committee. And he's going to talk a little bit at the end about things that go on in this committee and what's going on. And I think that you'll find it very interesting. So, nutrients general permit. In regards to the NGP, Ecology stated basically that individual permits reissued during the nutrient general permit development period will contain facility-specific nutrient requirements. Well, earlier I told you that Friday of last week, I received an email on a couple permits that were draft, and they did contain facility-specific nutrient requirements. Matter of fact, the two permits don't align as far as what their ecology is looking at for their nutrient reduction requirements. Ecology also stated that any wastewater treatment plant that would like more information on how it would affect your plant, they wanted you to contact your permit writer. Well, guess what we did? We contacted them and we asked for more information, and we want to know specifically how that was going to impact our facility. How do we develop long-term capital planning? How do we need to prepare for this? What should our expectations? Now, being part of this permit advisory group and the conversations with Marty, kind of already knew the answers to this. Ecology came back and said that, you know, basically we're trying to get a draft permit out by the end of the year, but it's probably not going to happen until 2021. And that that our facility will be under that general permit until specific criteria is applied to our permit beginning in 2024, at which time caps will be included in the permit. It's kind of an interesting statement. Then they also said that we were informed the general permit will look at each plant individually and historical data to determine caps. Now I can tell you, I've been talking with Ecology since 2002 on this. I've talked to three permit writers, the roaming operator, the Northwest's department heads, two of those, trying to get some clear answers. And I've heard this mantra for years. Look, we know that there's going to be economic impact. We know to come in and apply these kind of things are unreasonable. They're not cost effective. They could potentially blow any area that does not have, you know, a high median income. It could definitely put you past your affordability index, and that creates other problems for facilities, especially when it comes to grants, loans, those type of things. The other thing Ecology stated was kind of interesting is that we would be updated on the limitations of those permits once they are drafted. As I said last Friday, we received notice that they were drafted and issued, and we have access to those draft permits. They went on to reiterate, and they wanted to make sure that, you know, we understood that the NGP will not be a one-size-fits-all. There will be different requirements for different facilities. And they also went on to say it's very dependent on the impact on the receiving waters in the area. And there's some things we're going to talk about at the end, some of the questions that come up with these kind of statements. And Marty might be able to give you a little inside information on this, but I mean, it is still so early in discussions with Ecology and other regulatory agencies, environmental groups, and the treatment plants to really provide you any solid information. Again, this is factual information that was received, but as we get into this, there's going to be a lot of assumption and speculation. So Ecology, you know, of course, backed it up with similar statement to Governor Inslee, and what was stated during their process in court is that, you know, Ecology has expressed its commitment to addressing nutrients, and it also recognizes facility limitations, and it wants to allow growth. Basically, you know, we're all going to have a baseline set for this nutrient general permit in 2024. Our particular facility will have more specifics. And they also said it will take a long time to reduce nutrients to a level that achieve water quality standards. Now we're right back to the WQBELs, which don't exist yet. So, you know, how do they define what these requirements specifically are going to be when they haven't even set the criteria to meet? So this is kind of interesting, and Marty can talk a little bit about that. So one of the things they wanted to reassure us about is that in other plants also, that nutrient reduction will not be instantaneous. There will be continual improvements over several permit cycles. And this is a very important period. You know that our permits are 5 years. We're going to get 1 in 24. Several permit cycles would mean 2 or more. Basically, that would put us out to, what, 2034. And ecology does not expect instantaneous results. Well, NWEA doesn't like this, or Northwest Environmental Advocates. And so they came back on May 28th, a few weeks ago, filed in the Court of Appeals, and they're not happy with January 24th ruling in the Superior Court, and there's probably more to come on that issue. We'll have to see how that pans out. So that's a court battle happening, and usually these kind of situations, 6 months to a year before we really know what direction this is heading, unless something changes drastically. So, nutrients general permit. The exact permit conditions are still to be determined. Nobody knows. If anybody's telling you or you hear anything on what needs to happen or what's going to happen, it is all speculation and assumption. Ecology has still reiterated they're going to work with stakeholders. This is the advisory group, the treatment plants, the environmentalists, all the regulatory agents through 2020 to develop that general draft permit. And all this information is on Ecology's website, so it's available for the public. So in summary, here's the positions between Ecology and the Northwest Environmental Advocates. A little bit more information when I filled you, some dates on what's going on. As you can see, this has been going on since 2017, when Ecology or NWEA came in and said there's too many walking dead permits. We want ecology. We want primacy taken away from ecology because they're not doing anything. What a walking dead permit or a zombie permit is a permit that is expired and a facility continues to operate under old permitting conditions. And so any new permitting conditions that may have been applied to other facilities in waters, in discharges to waters of the state have yet to be applied to those, and they don't like that. The SKWRF had a walking dead permit for, I believe it was 2 permit cycles during the upgrade. Sometimes there's conditions that force walking dead permits. Basically what you're saying is, why would we want to create a permit when a plant's going through an upgrade? Until everything's settled and done, there's no reason to issue the permit, because knowing, the approved processes or conditions or limitations of the plant, how can we impose those if it has not been completed? It just doesn't make sense. So very important. We don't know the conditions of all those, but like I said, it sounds like they just took a strike and said, hey, Ecology's not doing anything, but I'm sure there's more to that story. So the permit approach from Ecology versus NWEA, when we look at all the information that is available and discussions that have been had, Ecology wants to do nitrogen load caps. It wants to do its water quality modeling and complete that, and also WQBELs. It wants to work off the 2019 bounding scenarios report. If you remember, there was a study of the Salish Sea with dissolved oxygen and all kinds of things. And eventually what they want to look at is getting total inorganic nitrogen down to 8 milligrams a liter, BOD down to 8 milligrams, and eventually be able to come up with those water quality based effluent limits. But it's going to take years to do that. Northwest Environmental Advocates says, look, we want those 8 carts, and we want technology-based effluent limits, and we're holding our ground. We want total nitrogen at 3 milligrams and phosphorus at 0.1 or lower, and we want everyone to use tertiary treatment technology to reduce toxics. So that's a summary of the battles that have kind of been going on in court and between the Northwest Environmental Advocates who sued Ecology and Ecology and the state's position. So how would this affect SKWRF? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. The information I gave you and told you there's a lot of speculation. We don't know what we don't know. There are just too many unknowns. But we're going to make some assumptions and give you some information based on assumption. Obviously, this is going to change as soon as we actually have factual information where we can take that information and apply it to our facility to give you information so that you can be well informed. So I talked about with Public Works this bootstrap calculation, and this is what it appears based on the 2 plants that were issued these draft permits. The ecology is using this, what's called a bootstrap calculation, in determining a cap. And so we're going to assume that nutrient cap and the imposed requirements for SKWRF would be based on that bootstrap and on historical data. So basically what this bootstrap calculation does is it takes the sample sets that you have over a period of time. As we go through this, we took our 5 years worth of data. And that's why we went back to the 2014 timeline, because that's when we began monitoring this. And so we felt that when I provided this information, you could see over that date range, because we assume that's when it's going to happen. So basically, they take all these data points, they extrapolate them out to make sure there's 5,000 of them, and then they take an upper 95% confidence interval around the mean effluent load, and it's the mean with the range, or 4750 out of 5,000. Well, that all sounds good. Ecology is not too quick to let anybody see how that calculation works, but they were kind enough to provide a calculator for us. I can tell you by running numbers, it is not a 95 percentile of the treatment plant. It actually provides a higher value. So, but without seeing how that calculation works, we can't really come up with understanding how the data sets in that are really coming together to provide this information. So looking at our facility, since we only measure our nutrients on the discharge, that kind of forces us into the mean effluent load. But depending on permitting conditions, we may run those influence against the effluent and look at doing efficiency calculations, which this calculator does also. And we'll see what pans out best for the facility. It sounds like we can use either one, but they're going to set some numbers. And that's part of the negotiations that happen during the normal permit renewal process. So here's some of the unknown load cap considerations. Receiving water endpoints are undefined. So where are we at in our receiving waters out here between us, Bremerton, and Central Kitsap? What is the endpoint? What is the defined maximum amount of nutrients that can be discharged without creating any harmful effects? And how does that really affect the dissolved oxygen in our receiving waters? That has yet to be defined because their studies aren't complete. Water quality-based effluent limits, those WQDLs, they haven't even been developed yet. So, some of the questions we come up with is, how do we start counting this? I mean, we've got 5 years worth of data. Is it going to be annual data? Is it going to be a moving average? I mean, how is this going to be done? Because until we have those questions and understand what ecology is going to be looking for, it makes it difficult for us to project and understand the overall impact to the facility to be able to report back to the owners of the facility. So the other question is the annual seasonal, max dry seasons, monthly, how is that data going to be brought together? What are they going to be looking for? Is there going to be variances in that based on seasonal? How do we look at this data? Is it going to be done mass, concentration, or both? And nutrient speciation. Are we going to be looking at any toxics? So one of the interesting things on the permits that were issued, draft permits, is these questions are still not answered because there's variability in how they apply it. So it looks like ecology in the draft permit, even though they don't have a nutrients general permit, is still sticking with the mantra that they're going to be looking at plants individually. So we still have to assume it is based on the capability of the plant to remove it. And Marty's going to talk a little bit about, because he dove into those permits, about how ecology is kind of factored in also in those permits, that they understand the economic impact of plants. And he'll talk a little bit about that. One of the questions we have too is your accounting issues. That representative effluent data, when you have regular or irregular plants, how can you be sure that the discharges are representative to what's going on there? So let's say that we sample Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Bremerton samples and records data Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and there's an overlap on Central Kitsap, which is Kitsap County plant on one of those days, and those combined numbers create these spikes. So how are we going to make sure that that information is actually being looked at? I mean, is it bubble permits? We don't know. How is ecology going to let us correct for any aberrations or upsets or maintenance that we're doing, testing in the plant, those type of things? How is that going to be, how is the accounting issues for growth going to be done, especially if we have a lot of dynamic values based on seasonal variations? I mean, do we look at annual averages? How is this going to be done? We just don't know. And of course, the frequency and duration of these accounting issues, tracking back to basically how is ecology monitoring the receiving waters to know that any changes or requirements they're putting on POTWs is actually either effective or, it's not doing anything. Performance liability and allowable exceedances, if another plant in our receiving waters is doing really well and yet we don't have capital cost, or they don't have capital cost, or we're doing well, are they going to allow a little bit of movement between multiple plants? We'll talk about crediting here in a little bit. And the big question for ecology is, how are they going to track this process or progress? And how are they going to report back to us so that we can make sure that anything that's imposed upon us is being fair and equitable, and we really understand why we need to spend the money or we need to do what we need to do. I mean, there has to be some accountability on ecology's portion too, or position too, to make sure that any of these imposed limits that we have are, consistent. And adjustment considerations, cap revisions. That's another one that's kind of an interesting one. Let's say that our receiving water can take 99 pounds per day, and we're at 20, and Central Kitsap's at 20, and Bremerton's at 20, but they're telling us 99. Can we revise and increase that to allow for more growth and capacity in the system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I can go on about a million questions that need to be answered, but basically what you're starting to understand here is there's just so much information, so many things that have not been asked that you really can't put your finger on what's going on at this point in time. We're very premature. So according to these other permits and what ecology said all the time is they're going to be looking specifically at total inorganic nitrogen. And they're not going to be looking at the other toxics right now. I think that's going to come through with the WQVLs, and they're not looking at phosphorus. So this basically tells you how total inorganic nitrogen is derived, and basically tells you how we would come up this information to plug into ecology's bootstrap calculator to come up with a number to provide to them, or what they're looking at based on our nutrient reporting, so that the plant can also monitor this also. So if we were to look again based at our permitted loading, and we included that nitrogen cap based on the data that we have, we would basically say that we're still at 4.2, 6340 on CBOD, 6910 pounds on the TSS, and our total inorganic nitrogen for max month, 556.73 pounds. Basically that comes out to about 70,000 pounds a year. So if they do a cumulative calculation and allow for those seasonal variances, we basically could have a monthly that would be monitored, but it was all, what was really important is the cumulative values at the end of the year. So we don't know. And again, this is assumed based on this bootstrap calculation and the information that we do have. We're making speculation that this is how it's going to be looked at. And based on the permits and talking to Marty, he did have time to go back and take a hard look at some of their values. Now we're looking at going back months and months worth of data from individual plants to try to come up with this. This does appear that they are using this bootstrap methodology. I can tell you one of the plants that I did have a chance to go through the permit, it does look like they're using cumulative values based on the bootstrap for a monthly or pounds per day. But, excuse me, yeah, this is pounds per day, so 60,000 was wrong. But one of the things that's really interesting, the other plant was not laid out like that. So it reinforces the idea that ecology is basically looking at individual plants, but it also raises more questions because even looking at these other permits, yeah, we see what's going on, but we still don't know how it's going to apply to us. Okay, so let's look at our total inorganic nitrogen, or our 10, and our discharge pounds for that same date range, 2014 through 2020. That red line that you see there is the assumed permitted level. And you see that for that time range, we are 87% of that permitted cap. Okay. So if we take a look at the 2019 through March 2020, same thing. You've got your assumed 10 pounds permit, and you look at our 10 pounds and you see that we're 89.9% of the assumed permit cap. Again, this is using information that we think is going to be true. It's all speculation and assumption because we have nothing definitive. So based on that data, obviously these would be some of the major concerns that the facility would have, and also the owners. You know, basically that data defines and tells us that we're basically sitting in almost 90% of the assumed nutrient cap. It also defines that with the nutrient cap, obviously SKWRF is near at capacity. I mean, we're looking at the data, that's what it's telling us. We also know that we have a footprint issue, and we might have issues if we need to provide for major expansion of the facility for those nutrients. So, you know, when you look at this data with the limited knowledge that you have on what's really going to happen and all this conjecture and assumptions, everybody walks out of the room, and that's our friend Chicken Little, the sky is falling. So I guess that's where we're at, folks. Actually not. I want you to understand a few things. Let's talk about the SKWRF. Let's talk a little bit about the facility management, how it's been going over several years. We'll talk about our current capacity in ERUs. We'll talk about optimization potential. One of the things that ecology has also brought up is that they are going to allow plants to come up with optimization in order to reduce these. This is where this improvement over several cycles comes from. And I'm touching on a lot of brief points because we could be here for hours going over this to bring you up to speed on everything. We're going to talk about the projected plant capacity scenarios, basically how many ERUs we can have left. And we're going to talk about the capacity management by the contributing partners. The one thing that I would recommend to the owners of this, along with our ratepayers as owners, is that we take a very methodical approach. I think it's very important. So let's look at a few things. Facility management. As I told you before, we've known about this for quite some time. We've been in discussions with ecology. We've done our best to understand the direction ecology's been going over several years so that we could set ourselves up to be able to deal with this. As you know, we can coordinate with the district, of course, and the city through its employees, and we request funding from you folks to meet defined goals. Those goals are also inclusive of the needs of the city and the district and its long-term planning and growth. I mean, we have to consider that. There's a lot of complexities that go on to operating that plant. There's a lot of planning, and there's a lot of things that are done that are not put out there because they are strategic planning items that we want to, take methodical approaches with. And I've said this over the last few years at SEC meetings. We plan and set long-range planning goals. We stay informed of potential concerns and we consider those impacts. It's very important that we consider that. The SKWRF is very unique to most treatment plants because basically we serve two masters. We have to answer to two different entities, and we have to do the best that we can to make sure that we keep both those entities happy, and we allow them to continue on with their goals and how they see their long-range planning, that happens in our community. One of the things I want to tell you that has been done, we have taken steps to ensure that capability to mitigate this nutrient discharge requirement. We have sought solutions. We've had a lot of discussions with people. We have done everything we can to wrap our head around how this works. One of the key considerations, and you've heard this mantra from me and it carries over to Marty, the one thing that we always keep in mind for the city and the district is that whatever we do needs to be the most cost-effective and efficient and in the best interest of the owners. We don't ask for money for niceties. There's a need for things, and I think you folks understand that, and you see things happen over time, and that builds reassurance, trust, and ensures that we're doing the best job we can for our owners, and that includes our ratepayers. So let's go back to this. We talked about this earlier. We had the 4.2, 6340, 6910, 556.73. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about is our ability to expand the MBR. So if we took the 2019 data and we assumed that we had expanded that MBR, I want you to notice how these trigger points count. Now, you notice I left the 10 out of there, total inorganic nitrogen, because this is our current 3 permitted items. So you can see that even with adding that NBR, that number drives us up to about just under 9,000 ERUs at that permit. We would have to basically rebuild the plant, re-rate, those kind of things to even drive that up. That basically is our endpoint number for capacity in the plant based on where we're at now. There's things that can be done to increase that potentially, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit. So we add that 10 in, and remember, we don't think it's going to be under that load criteria consideration, so that basically puts that at the remaining or the max permit level. And based on those numbers for 2019, basically, as I told you earlier, and our friend Chicken Little, that puts us at roughly 1,000 ERUs left as capacity. And this is where everybody gets excited, because I think a lot of your treatment plants out there didn't listen to what's being said, didn't read everything that came from ecology, haven't stayed involved, and haven't done proper planning. So, based on 2000 analytical data, there you go. I guess I have that same slide. So let's talk about these nutrient optimization opportunities. Number one, operationally, our MBR. We are currently running our MBR at 25% of capacity. And we have the ability to expand that MBR capacity up. In theory, because it is a nutrient removal system, the higher the rate we run that, and with expansion, we can easily drop our percentage of nutrient discharge down. Other processes. We've talked about a few things. There's actually a bigger picture, and I'm going to share some of that with you. You remember about 7 years ago, we started this process of kind of having all these capital projects. We did the grit system, then we moved on to the digestion system, then we went to our solids handling, took care of that, and then we are currently working on recycle loads, those scum pits that go back through the process, those type of things. That is given the plan, or once everything's implemented, it's going to give the plant an opportunity operationally to create optimization opportunities where we're looking at a cost of merely operation and maintenance increase, not looking at long-term capital costs. Now, earlier I talked a little bit about, we have an endpoint number with that TSS and those CBOD, and I said, well, we potentially re-rate the plant. If we go to the process to re-rate that plant, obviously at that point, if we move those numbers up, and you'll see these 10 numbers here fairly quickly, we'll probably be looking at some proven engineered systems for reducing that nutrient load, and also any emerging technologies that are coming out. There's kind of some fascinating stuff that's coming out from this right now. Credits. One of the other things, and I didn't put this in my list of questions, is there's been discussions about early implementation. Let's say that SKWRF, we're at basically 90% of our cap limit right now, if this all proves out to be true. And Ecology says, you know what, if you come in and do early implementation, we're going to back off. So if you had 5 years to reduce by, say, 5%, and we do 5 years in 1 year, do they give us a 4-year credit and then we don't have to do anything for 4 years? Can we step that? Optimization exceedance. What if they say you need to be 5 and 5 and we do 10 and 5 and we really exceed that? Are they going to push that through the next permit cycle and not require any further optimization? These are credit questions that are still in the air. Ecology is considering them because they think it's a great idea, but nobody's willing to commit to these. So again, we're in the assumption, speculation phase. The other thing is those credit exchanges. What if we are able to jump forward and say Bremerton can't do it? They have to put large capital investment, but we can jump forward really easy. Can we sell some of those credits to Bremerton? Or remember, it all discharges into the receiving waters, and so how are they going to look at the receiving waters? Can we, potentially create revenue from Bremerton to say, you guys can't meet this for 10 years. We can pop it out the next 1 or 2 with process changes, give you those credits, but we want something in exchange. We want cash coming our way because we know at some point you're going to complete that, but we're also going to have to start the process again. And that's where the expense portion comes in. If the other is true, and we are looking at doing a $2.5 million upgrade for it, and we know that the max capacity of the plant is, say, 30 years, and Bremerton comes back, or Central comes back and says, hey, for $5,000 a year, we'll save those credits. Well, then it's smarter for us to pay the $5,000 a year than it is to put out the $2.5 million, knowing that the plant is going to max out in X amount of years. So this proper planning becomes very important, but it's also important that we understand what Ecology's position is and what they're going to allow, and we still don't know that. Pure speculation. So nutrients optimization, there's things that we can do right now. Recycle loads, our solids handling. All of our solids handling has high nutrient value. It goes right back to the head of plant. And so we are discharging or recycling a high nutrient load to ourselves. We know that those nutrient loads off some tests we ran are about 38%. We're putting about 38% of that back for our solids handling. With this screw press that we finished up here, was it last year or year before? We have the capability for automation in that. So we can stretch that load out over a long period of time. So that really will diminish that overall return cycle load, recycle load, and eliminate us from having to take any capital investment to try to mitigate that recycle load. The chlorine contact chamber cleaning. Those scum pits that Marty spoke of, they also drain those chlorine contact chambers with debris that builds up, and it does denitrify, and it does have a lot of nutrient content in it. And that's what he was talking about, getting those finished up. So we have the capability to pump that right back into solids handling tanks, process it out, and not send it back through our system to be counted again and again. Our suspended solids, which were pushed up on that chart that I gave you, we could potentially deal with those with a re-rate of the plant. We know that those recycle loads, especially the chlorine contact chamber cleaning, are creating a lot of those solids that are being measured coming back into the plant. We also know that the surge flows to marine and pump station create a lot of those inconsistencies in those suspended solids loads, and that's something the city's working on. So right off the bat, there's things that we're set up to do, very little cost, except for the marina pump station, of course, and the re-rating of the plant, but we're set up to mitigate some of these nutrient issues. So if we looked at the total the 10 or the total inorganic nitrogen reduction capacity projection, this is our 2019 number. If we reduce that by 10%, that drives our ERUs up to 2,500. 15 will take us to 33, 20 takes us to 43, 30% takes us to 66, 35% takes us to another 8,000 ERUs. Now keep in mind, it's taken over 30 years to get 11,000 ERUs. So this course is all based, and it's an assumption based on this bootstrap calculation methodology and the information that we have. So what I'm going to show you is an interesting chart when you really start taking a look at the numbers. We have an assumed ERU growth of 2% per year. So what I did is I took all the information on all the ERUs from 2019 and we averaged that, and it comes out to right at 2%, which is kind of interesting. So as we look at the years go by, we see what the projected ERUs into the plant are based on what has happened since 1999. So if we come back and we look at the projected capacity year, we see that you have your flow with your expansion of your MBR, your CBOD, and your TSS with expansion. Should have highlighted this one for you. But yeah, basically our TSS puts us at 6028 and puts us out based on those projected numbers for connections or ERUs into the plant, basically caps that at 2041. Once we do the MBR expansion, because I have the calcs on what that would change that TSS, that puts the plant at being capacity at 2048. At a 25% reduction in that total inorganic nitrogen, that puts us out to 2042, and a 30% would put us out 2046. So when you look at all this information, what you actually see, this is where our problem lies. And back in 2016, I told you this was the concern. The total suspended solids in the plant are a major concern when we talked about the marina pump station. Now, if the marina pump station is a contributor to this, and we did have several engineering reports, and we can increase that, it pushes us up a few years. The other thing I want you to note, you know, when we hit 2046 with that plant, I mean, we're talking a 65-year-old plant. So you're getting close to the end of life on that plant as it is. So when you look at everything, it's pretty much in line with the growth projections of basically being end of life when it caps. So what does that mean? Well, from an analytical standpoint, it means that I think that our predecessors did a very good job of figuring out what they needed when they did the expansions, and basically how that would line out in the future. It was kind of interesting when I seen this. So if you remember, budget message 2019 given to the City Council in 2018 and the SAC committee. One of the things that I stated back then was, as permitting requirements change, it's more likely than not the facility will be impacted by more restrictive permitting conditions requiring increased analytical testing and potential upgrades to the facility. Again, hint, hint, something's coming, but we don't know what it is. Now, how are we going to manage that capacity? And of course, that's to be determined. How SKWRF and City and WSUD, or SKWRF to the City and WSUD is going to provide reports. You know, this all depends on how ecology comes back and says, yeah, this is what we're going to be doing, because we may need to look at it monthly, it may be quarterly, semi-annual, annually, we don't know. The other thing that we need to look at, depending on that, is the structure and content of those permitting requirements, which again, we don't know, is going to drive how that report content is and how we structure that information to provide to the city and the district. And also, the city and the district are going to have to do some self-management. You know, West Sound has a procedure in place where basically we issue availability letters based on known capacity. So, we don't get ourselves, if we don't have it, we don't issue it. Matter of fact, we're one segment of a force main where we have one ERU left on it. And so I'm checking with the engineers now to verify all the information. I've gone through it, it looks true, and they're reviewing it, because if so, then we're going to put basically a moratorium on that segment of a force main that we have. Also, threshold considerations. How are we going to address this? How are the owners going to address it? And how is the SKWRF going to provide information when we start nearing those thresholds? So, if we get close, depending on how this permitting is written and what our requirements are, those threshold considerations could become important. So, does anybody have any questions?
That was a lot to absorb.
That was as minimal as I could to have you try to understand it.
That was a lot of information, Randy.
Randy?
Yeah, I'm trying to get you guys back up. I can't see anybody here.
Oh.
Randy, would you mind repeating that whole thing again for me?
Yeah.
No problem.
Please.
Okay. Yeah.
Randy, if you turn loose of the screen, I have something to show the group.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to the screen. That's my problem. I can't.
Here, I can.
I can't get the screen back. Oh, here it is.
There we go. I stopped.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so just when
Now,
Randy.
remember, Marty's got some information too that he's going to talk about, that advisory group and some of that permitting information that was sent out last Friday. You folks want to hear about that?
Oh, yes.
Okay, Marty, do you need the screen?
No.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
It's all in the brain.
Right on, Marty.
I'm just kidding.
That's not an outlook.
So, all right, Randy kind of gave you a little bit of information, so I'm going to try not to.
Good. Yeah.
A little bit more than that. So
we're going into overload here,
We've been part of the Puget Sound Neutrogena Permit Advisory Group since probably November 2019. We did have a couple workshops initially to start up, to create, to get this going, and that was prior to the COVID era, and so we still continue with numerous web-based communications, and we've been involved in all the ecology Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings. And so really, Randy gave us a lot of info, and we really can go on forever. We are set to make moves to reduce nutrient loading, but have no set limits to base removal on. So a lot of the stuff that we continuously do, including like the CAS blower upgrade and the aero strips, that is, keeping nutrients in mind. So we always try and be proactive when it comes to nutrient removal and treating better. And they've done a pretty good job through the years to always update and upgrade processes here at the plant. It's been pretty cool, and we're doing pretty good. Like I said, the last year was, we went violation free with the permit. With the addition of that new MBR upgrade, we were able to split flows at different times during higher flows and take a huge load off that. So, with some of that balancing the CAS system and the MBR, obviously it comes with more money. There's a little more energy cost to running the MBR at a higher capacity. So it's one of those things that you want to know what you're going to do. I wouldn't just want to make a treatment process change, because all of this is permitted. And so you don't know what you don't know, kind of thing. If I don't know the limits of our nutrients, I definitely don't want to act on it. The permit, it really is the most important thing, and treating the wastewater is the most important thing. So without knowing anything, that's my hesitancy is going through a lot of these meetings. We had one May 7th, May 13th, June 10th. And so the May 13th was supposed to be how to calculate the nutrient cap, but we actually never got to that. There are kind of a lot of long drug out meetings with just a lot of chat. We did have a meeting on May 7th, and that was Kelly Farron was the speaker with DOE. and she stated they were hoping to have the general permit issued by the first cycle of 2021, and also that most of the details have yet to be worked out. No one size fits all. This is real stuff when we're going into, we're in May and we're talking about a general nutrients permit and releasing this thing for 70 plants in the Puget Sound, but have no idea. And it's actually been frustrating to me because I've been trying to be in these and involved with them, but each time there's no progression. So with the next two meetings, which are Thursday, July 16th and Thursday, August 20th, they're actually going to include local planners in the discussion so we can try and move forward with that. There will be different requirements, you heard from Randy, for different facilities based on their impact in their area. However, monitoring the impacted areas moving forward will be a challenge with the amount of time and money needed. So they actually have no idea how they're going to monitor those impacted areas moving forward in the future. So if we did have this nutrient reduction in whatever plant, wherever the discharge is, how do we monitor that after? We know that we meet the CAP permits, but is it good enough? They're really, for the Southwest region, are pretty understaffed, and so and overwhelmed with work. They have currently 30 expired permits out of 70.
70, yeah.
Yeah, so so these three, I'll get on those in a few. So
Well, Mark,
yeah, go ahead.
I would assume that the ecology, if that one group is taking them back to court again, with the possibility, would they start dragging their feet? Because, like, why would they want to come up with any kind of a rationale when
Exactly.
the court's going to could meet and produce other things? So to me, that they're just spinning their wheels until the court thing settled again, which will, who can tell if they'll go back to court again? So it's.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
ecology does a lot of that, spinning their wheels, waiting on court cases, not only on the wastewater side, but on the water rights side.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of just collaborative workshops are not really the name for it because it's a lot of round and round. I just wish that really personally, I wish they would just take action so we knew something and we wouldn't have to go back and forth over stuff that because I like to act on stuff too. If I knew what our limits were for something, I actually try and meet those, and not just meet them. You definitely want to do better than if you had to have a 10 of 9. You don't want to just get 8.99. You really want to get the best you can, but there's nothing set there. Also was stated at that meeting was there was chat of early action would if early action, I think you guys heard Randy talk about early action ahead of the time. If plants took early action, it would push someone to the back of the list, which was really weird to me because if we're all going through for a general permit, why would that put anybody to the back of the list? Everybody be trying to treat their water the best they can if they have these limits. And so they do not expect instant results, only continued improvements over several permit cycles. This was stated every single meeting, this exact thing was stated. And then the June 10th ecology meeting with Eleanor Ott, she's kind of leading the general permit. She said that optimization needs to be primary focus on the permit, and that's optimization with what you have. And then on the next line, the definition of optimization is needed. So it's kind of a contradiction. Optimization needs to be the primary focus, but can we define optimization? So that's really how they've been going a lot. And then she stated the initial report will have some sort of water quality benefit, but will not put people out. And so, like I said, we have these upcoming meeting schedules for Thursday, July 16th, and that's introduce short and long-term planning, continue with CAP optimization, working to include local planners in this discussion so we can maybe progress and just get anywhere. And then Thursday, August 20th is introduce monitoring and compliance, continue with CAP optimization and planning, also working to include local planners in that discussion. And then Wednesday, September 30th, final draft recommendations. And then Wednesday, October 21st, review and adopt final recommendations. So all of this, they're not meeting these scheduling, and we keep chatting about what these meetings should be about, and we're not meeting. When I initially contacted our permit writer, he had told us that it wouldn't kick in until 2024 for us. And so it's really been all over. And so then last week, 3 draft permits were issued. They were not part of the general permit. These 3 permits were just renewals that expired in January and May of 2019 that were just being reissued. They already had nutrient sampling in their permits in their previous permit cycle. So the nutrients weren't new. One of the plants did just get their quarterly sampling moved to monthly sampling. And when I did, two of the plants did get nutrient caps put on there. And so when I did the calculations for the nutrient caps, I determined that it had to be bootstrapped, because if it was the daily pounds of nutrient, it would have exceeded it. So these were actually draft permits that were put out, reissued by Ecology. So we can go on that at least. That looks like that's the method that they're going to use, at least for 2 of those plants, because the 3rd plant didn't have previous sampling requirements for nutrients, so they didn't get a cap. So 3 different plants. Also, one of them of the 3 have phosphorus removal listed. And what else? That was the only frequency. In addition to the permit renewals, nutrient optimization plan language was added below that. So nutrient in the permit. So nutrient optimization plan, these are in the draft permit. So this is actually stuff that they're trying to pass, pending the final. And so the nutrient optimization plan listed in that permit, within 12 months of the permit effective date, the permittee must submit a nutrient optimization plan. The nutrient optimization plan must include both a treatment efficiency optimization evaluation and a plan for future optimization. The treatment efficiency optimization must evaluate the existing treatment process for nutrient reduction opportunities through operational adjustments designed to enhance nitrification and denitrification, and using only minor retrofits such as incorporation of anox zones, review of septage receiving policies and procedures, and side stream. Minor upgrades are those with equipment costs not exceeding 5% of the annual equipment and supplies budget. So I just ran a quick overestimate of our general ledger for our operating, and we were at like 450. So 5% of that would be 22,500 the first year, which wouldn't really do nothing for us in wastewater. You might be able to provide some chemical, but it gives there's a lot of ways in treatment to try, and it's just trial and error while keeping the permit in mind, or you don't go no further. And so that actually is the newest language that we have in the permit for the nutrient. And this is a draft permit, but just a reissued permit that was already expired, not the general. Currently, we have nothing to go on for the direction regarding the general permit, because we don't know. We've got a list of current plant nitrogen levels around the sound, and we're really average with a lot of people. There were some higher, some were lower, but really across the board, our nutrient discharge was really average with all of them. So trying to determine what our limits for on there would be really trying to spend a lot of money without knowing what the car looks like. It's a really nothing definitive on trading was another topic. They will get into it eventually, but it's several steps down the road. And yeah, a lot of it, we really haven't gotten anywhere. So I'd like to give you more, but we're still, with ecology, we're still, there's no definitive. And those draft permits that were reissued, they were just reissued. That's not general permit. So I really, as far as the general permit date, I'm not sure. It depends on who you talk to move forward on that. And in speaking with Randy, that's been my topic too. We talk on how to not overreact and make sure that we already treat as best as we can every day, and future planning without you know, you always have to stay within regulations, and yeah, that is really all I got on the meetings updates. If you guys have any questions.
So Marty, for the minutes, could I get the exact name of that group that you're talking about, please?
Yes, it is Puget Sound Nutrient General Permit Advisory Committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any more other?
That's a tremendous amount of information, and it's one of these, as near as I can tell, a definite maybe. We haven't a clue what we're doing, but we need to move forward with something that we think is doing it correctly, but we don't know what correctly is. So
That's
back to the definite maybe. So what is it that you need from us other than just keeping us informed? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think one of the worst situations anybody can be in is to say, well, we just want to take a wait and see attitude, but we're kind of forced into that because we don't know.
I don't see too many options based on what you've been sharing. So
yes, and that's all public information that I provided you. So
yeah.
Randy, I had a question. I know you took a look based on previous ERUs, of projected growth of 2%,
right,
based on historical. I hate to ask for extra work, but I assume it's excelled. I'm just wondering, with the growth we're expecting to see here and is occurring, what would it look like if we were running at 3% growth?
Well, I think that a lot of growth that is happening in our end is pure speculation. According to the Puget Sound Regional Council on the unadopted 2050 vision, if I recall, the projected growth rate in our area is 1.9%.
Okay.
So through 2050. If you remember,
when you say our area, Randy, what do you mean? What's our area?
Kitsap County area, and I don't know specifics as to geographical location within Kitsap County, but I can tell you that Nick Bond is very informed when it comes to that information, and he could probably provide that. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I hate to quote this, I believe our area is 1.9% also, but or 1.87 somewhere in there, but I don't recall. So
Nick would be a resource for that, but at the county-wide level, there is lots of discussion over population distribution and how what areas are going to absorb what portion of the growth and so on. So yeah, I think talking with Nick and getting that information, at least to the extent we know today, and it's an issue under discussion, but it would help us make sure that we're at least looking at numbers that are representative of what collectively we're thinking. So
yeah, and it also puts us kind of in a bad position, because if you remember a couple of years ago, we talked about, as the SKWRF's debt payment began retiring out, we wanted to, if I recall that, starting in 2023, we wanted to start taking $500,000 a year and putting that basically in a rainy day fund, so that when we had hit the magic 2035 number, which was previously what we would have been given from ecology, and when we would have to implement some kind of nutrient reduction or, to address nutrients, we were going to have roughly $6.5 million in the bank to do that. Of course, now with what's going on, the unknowns, it does kind of put us in a quandary on how we want to plan. Do we want to say, okay, well, we know theoretically where we're at based on the information? Do we want to start looking at our general facility charges, plan on a major expansion, perhaps some scalping plants within the city and the district? I mean, there's a lot of planning that will need to be done, but it's very difficult to plan when you don't know what you're planning for. And so it really puts us in a bad position. I think the lawsuit coming from Northwest Environmental Advocates has caused a knee-jerk reaction out of ecology. I think they're doing kind of the shotgun approach and throwing things out, trying to placate. But even with the information that I've sat in on, and Marty goes to these meetings, there's no definitive answers on anything, and it really creates a lot of issues. It has some people scared. Us knowing what we have for capability, we know there is a finite amount of capacity. We can calculate out what those endpoints are for the facility based on growth projections. But you know what? If they change any of the requirements other than what we know now, it skews everything. And so it's just a bad position to be in. I'd love to come to the next SAC meeting and Marty and I talk about it and lay out a plan and say, we should be all raising our GFCs to this, and this is the plan. But what are we planning for until we know what's going to be required? The best that we could do now is maybe look at end of life of the plant.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, until we get some more direction from ecology, how can you? I mean, we can plan for what we know and what we're predicting, which is what kind of growth we're anticipating, but we don't know, based on the information from ecology, how well that plant is going to be able to deal with that growth, and at what point can it no longer support the level. So I appreciate it in an awkward position, but I guess it is what it is.
The way that Port Orchard Public Works has responded thus far, I'll share my screen with you real quick, is this: we are revamping the way that we do our concurrency for water and sewer, and have added this paragraph right here that is basically a disclaimer saying that if that nutrient cap happens and the current permit expires December 31st, 2023, then we have the right to rescind this certificate. Because Mark and I discussed it, virtually went to a couple of meetings about it, and discussed it with not only the city attorney, but our land use attorney, and decided this was the safest way for us to proceed. So. Yeah,
I agree.
Well,
Back to my definite maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the only point I was making is the fact is that with things that are happening that we see in the city, and if you're working with Nick, that's great. I just, sometimes it's good to look at highs and lows and knowns, and that's all point I was trying to make as we try to go down this path of additional possible restrictions from ecology. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
We'd love to update you as we have information, but I think it's really prudent and that we take a methodical approach, not inundate you with a bunch of information that ends up changing until we have some really good, solid knowledge of what's going to happen. Then it's easier for us to project out that information. It's a difficult position to be in, but it's also a position where you don't want to have the owners not know what's going on.
Yeah, I appreciate the information.
Appreciate
so, Marty and I hashed this for a long period of time on how do we present this. We don't want to create a scare. We want, to reassure you folks, there is a plan in place to be able to mitigate these issues. But what exactly issues are we trying to mitigate at this point?
Yeah.
We really are uncertain. So
it definitely was a fire hose.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I see is that we do have some improvements that we're going to be making in the future anyway that will help us in some ways. So you laid those out. So I think, and until we get something that is solid, that we know where we're going or where we have to go, then we can make decisions that we have something to make a decision on.
Yeah, if you really look at what's going on between ecology and the treatment facilities and then all the stakeholders as far as the environmentalists and things like that, ecology is trying to walk a fence. And, at some point they're going to have to get off that fence and pick a side and put their feet in the ground and say, here's how it's going to be. And there's going to be somebody that's going to be unhappy, but they can't be all over the place. And, I've sat in some of the meetings and, it's like I said, we keep hearing the same things. We're not going to expect instant results. So this is going to be several permit cycles. It's going to be optimization only. But on the other hand, they call it caps. So, you know, they're kind of walking the fence, I think, trying to make everybody happy, and before they come up with something. But they also know too that they could end up putting all the POT, well, not all of them, some of them are in pretty, you know, well-to-do median household income areas. But, you know, you could easily push ours, which doesn't have that high of a median household income in East Port Orchard. You know, you could put us over an affordability index. And if we have to raise rates to the point to pay for something like this, or got into that situation where they implemented something just outrageous, like the 8 milligrams and 0.1 of phosphorus, you know, there was a plant up north, and I can't recall what it was, did a study here about a couple months ago on this information just to try to figure out where they were. And they figured their sewer rates would go up to almost $250 a month to be able to cover if they went to those type of numbers, because they just, and then it just put them right out of the affordability index for their community. And so then the point becomes cut it off, tell everybody to do on-site. It's no longer point source, and we stay where we're at. You know, and of course that creates other issues too, because that diminishes the density of development, and it's contrary to, you know, what ecology is saying is they really don't, you know, they're kind of talking on both sides of their face. We don't want to stunt growth, but we're going to have to put some things on, but we're going to allow a lot of flexibility, and we're not going to have great expectations. And so it's just all over the place.
Yeah.
Jim, it may be for you, but it certainly is bringing back nightmares of moving to secondary treatment.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
All right.
The public would go crazy
Oh, yeah.
if we had to.
Oh, we have public meetings. We'll have them down at City Hall. At least you have a police force there.
Well, Jim and I can painfully remember the public meeting we held at the high school performing arts center.
Yeah.
And we had police there.
Well, we had it also when we had one up at Cedar Heights, and
Yeah,
that was just packed to the limit, and that was a very hostile crowd.
Well, I tend to remember the one up at the high school being pretty hostile too, but fortunately we were able to hide behind some of the state federal officials that were mandating it.
Yes, but
I don't know, you know, Cindy asked me if I would chair the remainder of this. She had to leave early, so I hope that's acceptable with the rest of you folks. I'm not sure if you guys have delegated or designated a vice chair, but in the meantime, is there anything else that we need to learn about the ERU capacity? And
no, that's all we have for now, unless Marty has something.
Good, because I think at this point my head is full of nutrient limits and ERUs left, and I'm afraid if you try to put anything more in there, something is definitely going to fall out. So with that, can we move on to Jackie? Are you going to do an update on the Marina Pump Station?
Yes, I'll be very brief. We've got the 30% plans, figured out the basically the footprint that we want for the new pump station. They came back, as I reported to the utility committee, they came back with an astronomical number, and we told them we wanted some value engineering, so we got it down to about $7 million for the upgrade. So I started negotiating with the engineering firm to go to the 60% plans, and got a ridiculous number from them for what they wanted, $800,000, almost $800,000 for the 60% plans, which puts us over $1 million just for 60%, which was unacceptable. So I pushed back and said, you guys need to sharpen your pencils. You know, we expect for $1 million, which is about 15% of the total project, which is the rule of thumb for, you know, the amount of engineering per project. We expect to be 100% ad ready, permitting done, everything. So you guys need to come back. And they emailed me late this afternoon and said we're talking internally and seeing what we can do. So if the fallback position is if we have to take our 30% and go play in somebody else's sandbox, then that's what we'll do. So.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions or comments that we need to
I
discuss?
just had one on the if there were any updates on like the decant station or any kind of plans to make that thing work at all.
I can tell you the answer is no, but the problem is that because well, for one thing, Peter has just reported that, or Jim Gross from BHC called me yesterday and told me that Peter is leaving BHC, and that's been our sewer engineer for a while. So they're scrambling and getting that squared away. I had planned on having the water side of things look at it, but they are in the final throes of doing our water system plan. So I don't want to give them a new task, i.e. the decant facility, until the water system plan is done, because it's the same group of people. I want the water system plan done before I go on to another task, but that's the next thing on my list.
Thanks.
You bet.
Okay. What I see on the agenda is the next proposed meeting to be determined. Is that to be determined tonight, or how would you folks like to proceed with that?
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Well, the
You're going to
budget's
meet
coming
tomorrow?
up.
Sorry, Jim.
I said the budget's going to be coming up, so I imagine September or somewhere in there.
Yeah, we have to report ERUs by October. So I know that the city and WSUD have been working together on the ERU count. It's almost wrapped up. So we'll be able to report those. Budget, of course, we can, we've got to get some information to you folks by October on that. Yeah, so maybe we might want to look at October.
October.
Randy, isn't your deadline October 15th?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, and September is the best time to have that meeting, because we should be able to get that together, you know, pretty close.
Well,
September 16th is the third Wednesday.
Yeah, I have no issues.
so just keep in mind, we've been running split shifts and we haven't had the staffing here, so we haven't even approached the budget yet. And there's a lot of considerations being made for the reduced revenue due to COVID-19 and some of the policy changes that we're going to have to look at internally, because we're going to see some unintended consequences of some of our policies because of how we do things coming into this next budget cycle. And also with the governor's proclamation of waiving liens, penalties, and fees. That's a part of our revenue stream that comes in for the budget for water. Well, it doesn't affect SKWRF, but it affects us up here. And knowing what's
Have you
going
had
on.
many people request waiving?
I don't have any numbers. I think that we are seeing somewhere around the neighborhood of about 15%. Most people are paying.
Just for your information, Randy, our finance director just put together a policy that I'm sure he'd be happy to share with you that meets the governor's requirements and still recoups that money over time, if you're interested.
Yeah, and you can put them on those payment plans.
Right.
Yeah, we've already implemented that policy in our resolution and clarified that a couple meetings ago for payment plans. So it's just, I don't think, this is personal, I have no inside information. I don't think the economy is going to recover as fast as people anticipate. I think we'll see a little bit of a spike, and then I think it'll drop off at level. I don't think we're going to see a quick return. I'm hopeful that it is. I was talking to some people in the community that own businesses, and one of the things that I think is going to be really important, and I know the city has programs that address this, but it's going to be really important that, all of these businesses that are open right now try to, provide people information that it's very important that our community businesses are supported as it opens up, because I think that we're going to see some unintended consequences start to occur in a few months if there's not enough of a spike for these people to sustain, especially when these proclamations expire, rents are due, late fees and all that. And what we did on our late fees is we said that basically after our commissioners defined that it no longer is in existence, we put like a 2 and 3 month period before they would be implemented to kind of phase those back in over time. So,
but in theory, other than you possibly could have an increase in the number of disconnections, people are obligated to pay their base fee.
right.
It's the late fees that you have to waive. So as a utility, the economy shouldn't have a super dramatic effect, unlike those who survive on sales tax.
Correct.
That's going to be the big hit.
Yeah, and I heard the county, and I don't know how official this is, but the county is lost about 10 million in revenue they're looking to make up. And we know where the county's revenue comes from, so I would expect that we're all going to get a hit somehow.
Well, most of that is from sales tax again. But as a utility, you don't live on sales tax.
No, we don't live on sales tax.
So Randy, how does that equate to the timeline for the budget and stuff? Are you asking the committee to consider moving that October 15th date back, or?
No, we can do it earlier if you want. It's just that we were hoping that we had a little more solid information, because originally when these discussions ensued, Ecology was pretty adamant that they were going to have that NGP draft out in 2020. And now you're hearing they're thinking about pushing it forward. It would be really nice to do some long-range planning and really understand what the impacts are going to be and be able to apply that, and on and on for our budget. But we can go ahead and move forward the budget. But you always don't like to provide a budget when you know something's looming out there. You really haven't touched on it and kind of had it part of that budgetary process. So we can definitely do it in September if you like.
I think the group totally understands that you guys' hands are tied as far as planning,
Yeah.
The budget is a budget.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
it's
September,
what we know at
let's
the
get it
moment.
out. Yeah, let's get it out in September,
Okay.
and then we go from there. And if we have to make any adjustments, if we have more information where we have to do something, then we talk about it again, either mid-year or whatever it takes.
Yep.
So, is
So
that
I'm
September
back
16th?
to September 16th, the third Wednesday.
Mm.
Is that going to work for folks?
Yeah, I can make it.
Yep, no problem.
So we
Okay.
make it the same 6:30 as it was tonight, 6:30 on the 16th.
And still a Zoom meeting?
Well, it depends on where we're
That's yet to be determined.
Yeah.
I think for right now, let's plan on it being a virtual, and we can certainly change the venue once we know what's going on in September.
Yeah.
We don't advertise until about a week and a half before the meeting. So,
And I don't know about you guys, I really enjoy seeing you guys, but I'm actually getting to where I like these Zoom meetings, because the commute, other than tonight, the traffic was horrible.
Well, I honestly thought Jay was the cause of all this, because at the last in-person meeting, he said that the next meeting he was bringing cookies. And so I think that
Yeah,
I definitely wanted to stop it all in the tracks.
Okay, well,
Get rid of it. Yep. Yep.
Jay, they caught us, so sorry.
We'll have to eat.
Okay, is there anything for the good of the order?
thank you all so much.
If not, I guess we can adjourn the meeting, and I don't know if this is being recorded or not, but whoever is, stop it.